Thanks. Don't do this, please. Please don't do this.
We are talking Death Cast. This one is directed and written by Bobby Maringley and stars Lacy, Hartselle, who you may know from Curse of the Nun. So Death Cast tries to be somewhat of a meta/experimental horror film that is a kind of partial found footage movie. A lot going on, you might say there. Now, what is the actual concept of this film? Well, the film actually is a kind of a film within a film in some ways. It focuses on 6 jobbing actors, all of whom are hoping to kind of get their big break in Hollywood. And they essentially go to this kind of casting audition for a horror film, which is deemed to be somewhat kind of experimental in the fact that there's going to be no crew, no director, everything is just kind of done remotely, and it's only meant to be like a one-day shoot, and it's meant to be for this kind of like this horror film. And the idea being that these kind of 6 actors are going to be going to this remote kind of cabin in the woods, if you like, and they're meant to act out the whole film within kind of the one day. And they'll all be filmed by various kind of drones and, you know, fixed cameras and things. But when they get there, we learn that the filmmakers may actually be wanting to do a real life kind of snuff movie and are actually wanting to kill our actors for real. Now, what will happen, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works in Death Cast. Although I won't say this movie is original exactly, it has some original elements within it. We have seen meta films, we have seen kind of film within a film, and when it comes down to it, it's essentially slashers, you know, a killer running after, you know, teenagers or young adults. So ultimately it isn't anything particularly kind of new, but it has at least a few little kind of like bells and whistles of originality. I think the idea of having this kind of almost like a Tropic Thunder, if you've seen that, so we have these actors not realising they're actually kind of in this thing for real and kind of you know, acting it out without kind of initially realising at least that they're actually in genuine danger, is an interesting one. And like I said, it's kind of somewhat kind of found footage. Now, it doesn't feel like it a lot of the time, but the idea here is that there's already been lots of kind of like fixed cameras set up around this house and around the kind of surrounding areas as well. So although the movie doesn't necessarily feel like a traditional found footage per se, because you don't get really so much of the shaky cam, you know, we do have the cameras kind of pointing at our, you know, our actors and them kind of interacting with them, knowing that they're there, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like almost feels like somewhat of a hybrid from a kind of a found footage movie. You might still want to kind of banner it under it, I guess, if technically speaking, I suppose it would be. So there's some interesting kind of ideas there. You know, you can argue this movie has elements of the likes of kind of Hostel. I recently reviewed one called The Follower, which is again it's like Hostel on the run, which kind of like this is as well. I think Lacy Hartselle is like kind of our main character, does a pretty good job, but she has a reasonable resume of kind of work behind her at this point. And I think is definitely the strongest actor on a kind of set here, and she gets the most screen time as the kind of the main character, which is obviously kind of good news. And I guess it's kind of as we kind of are heading into, you know, 2022 and beyond, we'll see kind of more tech-based kind of horror films, and this one obviously is kind of has elements of that, because we're assuming that, you know, this thing's getting streamed, you know, out on the kind of dark web or something like that, or, you know, it's all kind of very technology plays a fairly big part in this movie. Okay, so what doesn't work? As I mentioned, I think Lacy Hartselle, so kind of our main character, does an okay job. I'm not going to say she's, you know, an Oscar-worthy performance or anything like that. The rest of the cast, however, I think are rather lacking. Now, when we kind of get into the movie, we have our kind of cast of characters playing parts within the movie, if that makes sense. So they are actors playing a role within the film. And I was thinking, because the acting wasn't particularly good, and I thought, okay, so when they're playing the part of their their kind of acting role, so to speak? Are they deliberately kind of trying to be a little bit kind of crappy acting, but then when you see their real personalities, they'll kind of act a little better? Nope. It's just kind of like pretty kind of weak acting across the board, with the exception, I think, of Hartselle, who does an okay job. So the acting here is fairly kind of weak. The line delivery is weak. And I thought it was going to be a knowingly kind of weak performance to kind of sell the fact that we have an acting role and then the character's real kind of personality, so to speak. But no, it's definitely not as subtle as that. Even kind of some of the kind of the physical acting, we have a couple of kind of action sequences, if you'd like, where we have there's like an antagonist, this guy with a hoodie and a mask, whose kind of face is always blurred out with digital kind of trickery. Couple of fight scenes, and they're so poorly done. I mean, these are meant to be like real fight scenes, so it's not meant to be like ones that are, staged for the movie within the movie, so to speak, but they're kind of weak. So the whole kind of acting, both physical and kind of just kind of dialogue scenes, I have to say, is a little weak all round. I think the concept needed to have a little bit more kind of context behind it. We don't really know why our antagonists are doing this. We don't really even know, how many people are involved, how kind of like deep it goes. But there's a lot of cameras dotted around this kind of quite large area. So you'd have to think that this must be a fairly kind of large operation, because we see loads of kind of different angles. Now in reality, of course, they're just moving cameras around to suit the whatever shot they need to get. But in the context of the film, we're meant to believe this whole area has been kind of wired up with kind of different cameras, and we have different drones that are kind of like buzzing around, which obviously takes multiple people to kind of operate it and kind of look at all these cameras and switch the views and all this. But we really don't see anyone. It's never really kind of like given any depth in regards to the forces that are behind what's kind of going on. I think the idea here is just that the concept was enough, but it never really gives us any kind of meat on the bones in regards to that as well. I was expecting this movie to be somewhat clever and maybe have a few twists and turns. Without giving anything away, we have a character that dies off screen, and I was expecting them to go, that's going to be like, we didn't actually see that person die, so we're gonna find out that person's secretly involved, or the ending seems like, there's gonna be someone else that's kind of secretly involved. No, it's just kind of the very basic that we see on screen. Even though those two options might have been quite generic and done plenty of times before, it would have added at least something extra, but no, it is just very, very straightforward. And the problem is with this film is that when you take all the bells and whistles off, it's just the people running around from a very uninteresting killer. The only thing we see of this killer, the only thing we know, it's just this guy in a hoodie. We don't know how many people are behind it. There's not a very interesting look. There's not very interesting kills. It's more just kind of like, a stabbing with a knife and with a little bit of blood, and that's kind of it. Maybe a slit of the throat. The kills aren't particularly kind of impressive or graphic or gory in any kind of particular way. It's a little uninspired on that, and I'll be honest with you, this movie drags because there's really not a lot of depth within the kind of the narrative, outside of, as I say, the few kind of like interesting elements that it might have. When it's all said and done, the movie is just a bunch of people running away from someone else, and that's it. And we get long, drawn out scenes with just people just walking through the woods or running through the woods, or having kind of like, how are we going to get out here style kind of dialogue and things like that. There's really nothing to it. The concept as well about having these characters think that they're in a movie and what's happening to them is part of the film is cut really short. It would have been more interesting to have these characters still think that they're actually playing in the movie a little bit longer, because ultimately what happens is, without kind of going into too much detail, they realise pretty early on that things are amiss, and the concept is ultimately then finished, and it's just a case of we have a bunch of kids running around from a killer. So I think the movie misses the mark with its own concepts, unfortunately, and ultimately it is kind of boring when it comes down to it, with pretty kind of weak performances, an uninteresting kind of killer, and a concept which has not been expanded upon nearly as much as it should have been. So for me, this one's a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.